My ex poisoned my kids against me. Now I'm fighting in court to win them back. It is a situation I never thought I would be in. When Derek and I split apart 2 years ago, I thought, I can say now very naively, that we would be able to maintain civility for our kids' sake. After everything we had gone through, I did not want to make Olivia and Ethan endure the nightmare of a custody battle. With the passing months, it became clear that Derek intended for things to be anything but peaceful. He was set on doing everything in his power to ruin my connection with our children. The signs at first were not expected, so minor I missed them altogether. When the kids returned from weekends spent at Derek's house, they appeared more withdrawn and quiet than usual. I assumed it was simply an adjustment to switching between two homes. Divorce is hard on everyone, but especially children. Eventually, however, instead of the quietness I saw, gradually emotion began morphing into straight-out aggression. That is when I understood something more troubling than I initially thought was going on. Ethan, our youngest, was just 7 when Derek and I split up. He was always sensitive and affectionate, so he was sad, but only for a brief period. But as of late, he has completely changed his behavior and mood. Recently, Ethan has started snapping at me for the smallest tasks, which is surprising. He goes on to accuse of not caring about him, claiming that I don't spend enough time with him, and that I do not love him the same way Derek did. I feel that the things he has been saying are quite hurtful, but I also know that the sentences a 7-year-old utter is very abnormal and not something to expect from him. It's almost like someone has given him those ideas to think of. Lastly, we had Olivia, our 10-year-old. She was quite emotionally mature for her age, so her separation from us came as a shock because of how well she initially coped with it. At this point, however, she hardly communicated with me. If I asked whether she wanted to talk or how she was feeling, she would merely say, "You don't care about us." Dad said so, and shrug. Hearing those words come out of her mouth was heartbreaking. I knew then that Derek was behind this. He was using our children, our innocent, powerless children, as pawns in some twisted game to get back at me. The reality is that he was feeding them lies by gaslighting them into believing that I was some villain who didn't care for his children, when all I did was try to ensure the kids didn't feel uprooted. What hurts the most is how we started talking about this Derek. I tried reasoning with him on the fact that he was harming the kids more than he was me. The problem is every time I tried bringing this issue up, he would start gaslighting me and saying that I was a drama queen or a victim. He would glibly respond with, "They are just kids," and that legendary grin I so despised, while adding, "Maybe they're finally understanding who the true parent is." Stephen, no matter what I said or did to resolve the situation, Derek seemed always prepared to respond. He had some sinister motive and was always capable of striking the side where I was already injured. He was a master manipulator, which is one of the many reasons which destroyed our marriage. But this was a new low for me and my kids under his sinister game. With the passage of time, things got worse instead of better. The bond that I once cherished with Olivia and Ethan was on the verge of collapse, and after many attempts, I was unable to make any progress towards mending the situation. Derek had managed to manipulate their thoughts against me so bad that when I was actually spending time with them, it felt like I was all alone and they were absolutely disconnected from reality. Kids usually rolled their eyes at me as I made attempts to bond with them and say something, while the only thing that I got in return was disgust or mockery. One night when I put him to sleep, Ethan said, "I hate it here." His face was burning red and was scrunched up with anger, which is the opposite of how he usually looks. "I want to be with Dad. He told me that if you were so rude for me all the time, we wouldn't have to come here." I felt my heart shatter to pieces. It was quite hard believing what more Derek was feeding him and saying to him, but I had always considered myself to be more than a disciplined parent who doesn't shout or punish my child. It is not comfortable for me to compare. "Sweets, not every trait of your dad needs to be justified," I stammered, concentrating on my vocal volume. "I'm fond of you and definitely want to share time together, and that's the only thing that matters to me. What Dad says, it's not true. You know that, right?" Ethan had different ideas altogether. He opted to ignore everything I said. He was looking away while covering himself with the blanket. "Father believes and keeps saying that to justify your efforts to snatch the children away from him," he said. The XP chart was freezing, and my heart was heavy. I finally realized that this is how Derek is planned. What would suffer during this? He exposes the kids to me. What kind of twisted life is this? Everything was falling into place, and I didn't want to struggle. How do you deal with the reality and controversy of your kids' understanding of their life when it is painful to witness? Validating myself here is extremely difficult. Next weekend, after getting back from Derek, Ethan and Olivia had reached their breaking point as well. While without his father, Olivia was bounding through the house shrieking. The words flowing out of her mouth completely dumbfounded me. "Dad told me you don't even want us," she said, with tears flowing down her cheeks. "He said you're going to move away and leave us with him because you don't care anymore." "Olivia, that isn't true at all. I would never leave you. I love you above all things." "My daughter, now looking at me as if I am her enemy, willfully chose to ignore me. Dad says you're selfish and that you broke our family. I stood in complete disbelief as my daughter, who used to come home to me after school and excitedly share all the story aspects from her day, looked at me resentfully. The children have gone to sleep, and while the rest of the night I spent hoping to find some sort of peace, my thoughts, instead of worrying me, kept racing. This way of living is unsustainable, and whatever worrying goes through my head is a result of Derek's unfounded urge to ruin my relationship with Olivia. With everything I tried, having an open dialogue with him, letting the kids talk, nothing seemed to paint the picture I was hoping for. And while fearing that if I did nothing I would lose my children forever, I decided to take control of the ultimatum. Derek did not run out of resources. He was always ready to strike. I had to prepare for a battle, not for myself per se, but for the children. Their poor little minds do not deserve to endure the consequences of Derek's words and bitterness and their power attempts to manipulate them against me. Whether it is best for him remains questionable, but it certainly isn't fair to me. I had to battle hard to seize full legal custody of my children. I knew I had to get in touch with my attorney first thing in the morning, so that is the first thing I did. For whatever reason, I held back from doing this previously. I think I didn't want to involve my children in a horrible legal dispute. But, as I've mentioned before, I have no other option at this point. Derek was already manipulating Olivia and Ethan against me, and if I failed to act, that rift would become impossible to fix. As I laid the situation out for my lawyer, Sam, he paid full attention to me. I went ahead and told him everything Derek said to Olivia and Ethan and how they were beginning to react to me with some hostility. To my surprise, Sam didn't seem affected. Sadly, people have grown accustomed to these kinds of dilemmas, he replied. Parental alienation syndrome is a very serious issue, and the courts are well aware of it. Parental alienation? I was taken aback, and I had to inquire more. It's a scenario where one parent seeks to manipulate or influence children in such a way as to make them turn against the other parent, Sam said. What you're describing sounds exactly like that. If we can show that Derek is trying to orchestrate the destruction of your relationship with the children, the court will very likely award you custody. I never thought I'd say this, but that unfortunately felt like a far reach. The whole ordeal was frustrating, but knowing that there was at least a slight chance to curb Derek's manipulation was what put a smile on my face. There was no way that I would let one more second pass where Derek is essentially holding the puppet strings to the relationships I have with Olivia and Ethan. We started getting ready for the custody dispute. Capturing every single detail, Sam got his hands on every piece of evidence that we were able to gather from Derek's texts that seemed to show his attempts at manipulation, testimonies from friends and teachers that noticed the changes in the children's behavior, and even some recordings of things that Olivia and Ethan said to me. I'll be honest, it hurt to remember those times, but it was for a good cause. I braced myself for the legal battle ahead. It was more than just a legal battle, it was a matter of who would control my children's hearts and minds, and I wasn't about to give in to Derek. If you don't follow our channel, there's a chance you may never see it again. But if you've already subscribed, congratulations. You will always have the most interesting stories, so feel free to pick and choose how you want to watch or listen to them. The decision to fight for full custody was daunting and difficult to grapple with, but it felt like my only choice. At this stage, Derek had managed to turn my children against me, using them as pawns in his sick game of manipulation. I tossed and turned each night, replaying events over and over in my head. Everything from how this all started, how my marriage to Derek had gone from bad to worse, and how did our children, Olivia and Ethan, ended up in the middle of a war they did not understand. I wish that after the divorce, my ex-partner Derek and I could come to an understanding and co-parent without any issues. I used to trust him when he said, focus on the kids, and how he wanted us to maintain cordial relations. But those were just one of his lies, and now, I had to face the fire. He alienated my children so well that they had no choice but to see me as a villain. Now I had to show the court, and them, I was not a villain. At the very least, not to that extent. The weeks right before the court hearing date were tiring. My lawyer Sam was working around the clock to gather whatever evidence was necessary to show that Derek had systematically worked to alienate my Olivia and Ethan from me. I felt as though I were trapped in a haunted house, my children staring at me with abrasive hurt and anger, my children repeating Derek's words, rather his lies, as though they were truth. I remember one day very vividly when I was at Sam's office together with him looking through some papers. This time, he looked at me differently. There was something more serious in the way he gazed at me. We need to get the court to appoint a child psychologist, he remarked. Obtain someone who can assess Olivia and Ethan, understand the situation, and testify in front of the judge. I felt a bit apprehensive about this notion of a stranger talking to my children about their feelings, but in this instance, Sam was right. I did not possess the proof I required to substantiate Derek's manipulation. What I did possess was the need for a professional to dive deeper into his behavior and reveal the extent of his impact on them. A quest of seeking assistance took us to Dr. Martinez, a child specialist proficient at dealing with difficult custody disputes. She possesses a lot of experience, so I knew she would be able to help. She was extremely polite, yet had very strict manners, which I appreciated. I felt as though there was no scaremongering and that she really will tell it how it is. She outlined a plan, telling us how she will be working with Olivia and Ethan, and then later me and Derek to see the family dynamics and if Derek was indeed using the kids. They're experiencing a lot of emotional distress, Dr. Martinez stated whilst giving me a compassionate look. Children's minds are usually filled with a lot of fear and confusion during a divorce. And if one parent is indeed having a negative impact, it can cause some serious damage. Those words shocked me to my core. I always knew that Derek was manipulative, but I didn't have to hear it from an expert. All of a sudden, he wasn't just trying to make my life hell, he was harming my children's emotions, and likely for a very long time. The processing weeks were tough. Dr. Martinez worked with both Olivia and Ethan separately in a bid to crack the walls they had built for themselves. The entire time I was in the dark as to what was said, and that uncertainty was unbearable. I just had to pray that she would realize that my kids were not misbehaving due to me, but due to the false narratives Derek was feeding them. As time passed, I noticed that the situation at home got worse. Weekend after weekend, when the kids came back from Derek's house, they seemed more detached. Olivia wouldn't engage in any substantial conversation with me and only gave me one-word replies to my questions. Ethan, who used to be really caring, had turned moody and withdrawn. Soon after they got back from Derek's, Olivia hurled her backpack to the ground and shot me daggers. Why do we even have to come here? She shouted furiously. Dad says you were just doing this to hurt him. He says you were going to take us away from him and ruin everything. I was taken aback by the fury in her voice. Olivia, that's not true. I spoke to her in a calm demeanor, although my heart was shattering into pieces. I love you both, and I just want what is best for you. Well, we don't want to live with you, she shouted back. Dad's house is better. He actually cares about us. Those words hit me harder than I had anticipated. The truth is that I kept reminding myself it was not really Olivia talking, but Derek's voice stringing her words together and using her emotions to fuel his agenda. But boy, did it hurt. I felt like yelling and giving her every single detail to prove to her how Derek had been distorting her reality. But I couldn't. I couldn't fall into the same traps he did. Instead, I bent down on one knee to hold her hand. I care about you, Olivia, I said gently and painfully.